In 1923 Germany, a loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. Let that satisfying number sink in. 200 billion for a single loaf. Workers were paid twice a day because by evening, their morning wages were already worthless. People wallpapered their homes with cash. Children stacked bricks of banknotes like building blocks. This is what happens when a government fires up the printing press and simply never stops. And the Weimar hyperinflation didn't just destroy a currency, it set the stage for one of the darkest chapters in human history. Stick around, because how we get from worthless paper to the collapse of an entire democracy is a story everyone should understand. Hey, and on this channel, we dig into ancient currencies, financial disasters, and the wild stories behind the money in your pocket in a way that actually makes sense. Today, we're going deep into the German hyperinflation of 1923, widely considered the worst inflation ever recorded in an industrialized nation. In this video, you'll learn how the crushing war reparations from World War I backed Germany into an impossible corner. You'll see how the government's solution, printing more money, created a nightmare where prices doubled roughly every few days. We'll walk through the surreal daily life where banknotes became wallpaper, kindling, and toys. And then we'll cover the miracle currency that stopped it all practically overnight. But stay for the final point, because the real cost of this crisis wasn't measured in marks. It was measured in democracy itself. Quick note, this video discusses historical political events and economic policy for educational purposes. I'm not a financial advisor, and nothing here is financial or political guidance. So let's rewind. It's 1919. World War I is over, Germany has lost, and the victorious Allied powers sit down to decide what happens next. The result is the Treaty of Versailles, and for Germany, it's devastating. The treaty demands that Germany accept full responsibility for the war and pay reparations. We're talking about 132 billion gold marks. To put that in perspective, that was roughly equivalent to around 33 billion US dollars at the time, which today would translate to hundreds of billions. Now here's the critical part. Germany's economy is already on its knees. Factories have been converted from wartime production, trade routes are disrupted, and a generation of working-age men has been decimated. The country simply does not have the productive capacity to earn that kind of money. But the Allies don't care. Pay up. So what does the Weimar Republic government do? Have you ever been in a situation where you owe more than you can possibly earn? Imagine that, but you're an entire country. The answer, tragically, was simple. They turned on the printing press. And this is where the Papiermark collapse truly begins. The German government started printing money not to grow the economy, not to invest in infrastructure, but simply to buy foreign currency to pay reparations. They were printing marks to buy gold and foreign notes to hand over to France, Britain, and Belgium. It was a debt spiral with no exit. And it gets worse. In 1923, when Germany fell behind on payments, France and Belgium occupied the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland. German workers went on strike in protest, and the government promised to keep paying their wages. With what money? Printed money, of course. The printing press went from running hot to running white hot. Remember that hook, a government printing money without limits? This is the moment it became literal. Now here's where the Weimar hyperinflation shifts from a policy problem into something almost incomprehensible. By mid-1923, inflation isn't just rising, it's accelerating exponentially. Prices are doubling roughly every 3 to 4 days. Let me say that again. Every 3 to 4 days, the price of everything doubles. Think about what that means for an ordinary person. In January 1923, a loaf of bread costs around 250 marks. By November, that same loaf costs 200 billion marks. A single egg that might have cost 80 pfennigs before the war now costs 80 billion marks. Newspapers that cost a fraction of a mark now cost millions, then billions. The numbers become meaningless. The Weimar Republic, money people carry around, isn't money anymore. It's just paper with ink on it. And the government keeps printing. They're running over 1,000 printing presses around the clock. They can't even print the denominations fast enough. At one point, they're stamping new zeros onto existing bills because they can't produce new ones quickly enough. The largest denomination eventually issued is 100 trillion marks, a single banknote. Let that sit with you for a second as we move into what daily life actually looked like. Because point 3, daily life in this chaos, that's where this story goes from economics to something deeply human. All right, so what does it actually look like when your currency dies? This is the part of the historical hyperinflation story that stays with you. Workers were paid twice a day, once at midday and once in the evening. The moment wages hit their hands, they would sprint to the nearest shop to buy anything. Bread, potatoes, coal, it didn't matter. Because in a matter of hours, those marks would buy significantly less. Wives and family members would wait outside factory gates at noon with wheelbarrows and laundry baskets, ready to rush the cash to market before prices ticked up again. And when money becomes that worthless, people start finding other uses for it. Germans literally used banknotes as wallpaper, stacks of bills pasted to walls because it was cheaper than buying actual wallpaper. They burned money in stoves because it was cheaper than buying firewood. Children played with bundles of cash like they were toy bricks, stacking them into towers and castles. That image, kids playing with billions of marks like it's nothing, that tells you everything about how completely the inflation of 1923 destroyed trust in the currency. Bartering came back. People traded goods directly. A pair of shoes for a sack of potatoes, a piano for a bag of flour. The middle class, the people who had saved their whole lives in mark-denominated bank accounts, watched their life savings evaporate to nothing in weeks. A retirement fund that could have bought a house in 1921 couldn't buy a loaf of bread by November 1923. Meanwhile, people who held real assets, land, foreign currency, gold, were relatively protected. The gap between those with tangible assets and those who trusted paper money became a canyon. And that canyon created rage. But before we get to what that rage led to, there's a twist in this story. Because somehow, Germany actually stopped the hyperinflation. And they did it almost overnight. So here's the part that surprises most people. In November 1923, right at the peak of the madness, the German government introduced a brand new currency, the Rentenmark. One Rentenmark was set equal to 1 trillion old paper marks. 1 trillion to 1. That's the kind of exchange rate that tells you just how far the old currency had fallen. But here's what made the Rentenmark work. It wasn't backed by gold. Germany didn't have enough gold. Instead, it was backed by a mortgage on Germany's land and industrial assets. Essentially, the government pledged real, tangible property as collateral for the new money. And more importantly, they committed to strict limits on how much they would print. No more unlimited printing press. The psychology mattered as much as the economics. People needed to believe this new money would hold its value. And remarkably, they did. The Rentenmark stabilized almost immediately. Prices stopped their insane climb. Shops began displaying fixed prices again. Within weeks, a semblance of normal economic life returned. It might sound like a happy ending, a clever policy fix, and the crisis is over, right? But remember what I said at the top. This story doesn't end with economics. The worst inflation ever recorded in an industrial nation left scars that no new currency could heal. And point 5, the real cost, is the reason I made this video. The Rentenmark saved the currency, but it could not undo the damage to the German people's trust. Trust in their government, trust in their institutions, trust in the democratic system itself. Think about the middle class. These were teachers, doctors, engineers, shopkeepers, people who had played by the rules, saved diligently, and believed in the system. The Weimar hyperinflation wiped them out. Their savings were gone. Their social status was shattered. They felt humiliated, betrayed, and furious. And when people lose everything through no fault of their own, they become extremely vulnerable to anyone offering simple answers and someone to blame. This economic destruction created fertile ground for radical political movements. Throughout the 1920s and into the early 1930s, extremist parties gained traction by pointing to the hyperinflation as proof that the Weimar Republic was weak, incompetent, and controlled by outside forces. The narrative was simple. The old system failed you. The elites betrayed you. Only we can restore your dignity. This is not to say that hyperinflation alone caused what came next. The global depression, political instability, and many other factors played roles. But historians widely recognize that the trauma of 1923 fundamentally undermined the German public's faith in democratic governance. It created a wound that never fully healed. And when the Great Depression hit in 1929, that wound ripped wide open. The Weimar Republic, already weakened, couldn't survive the second economic shock. Within a few years, democratic institutions crumbled, and Germany took a path that would lead to immense global suffering. The Papiermark collapse didn't just destroy a currency. It destroyed the social contract between a government and its people. And when that contract breaks, history shows us that what comes next can be far worse than inflation. So let's bring it all together. We started with an impossible debt, war reparations that Germany could never realistically pay. That led to the printing press solution, which triggered the cascade of the worst inflation ever seen in a modern economy. Prices doubling every few days, the complete Papiermark collapse. We walked through the surreal daily reality. Wheelbarrows of cash, banknotes as wallpaper and firewood, children playing with worthless billions. We saw how the Rentenmark stopped the bleeding almost overnight through a clever combination of asset-backed currency and strict discipline. But the real lesson, the one worth remembering, is that the German hyperinflation of 1923 didn't just destroy money. It destroyed the middle class, shattered trust in democracy, and created the conditions for radicalization. Hyperinflation killed a currency, but it also killed a democracy. And that's what makes this story one of the most important economic cautionary tales in history. Important reminder, this was a look at historical events for educational context. Economic and political situations are complex, and past events don't predict future outcomes in any guaranteed way. If this story hit you the way it hit me, do me a favor. Drop a like and subscribe to Money Origins. We cover the wildest stories behind the money that shaped the world. And if you want to see how this kind of hyperinflation played out in the modern era, with even bigger numbers on the banknotes, check out the next video, Zimbabwe's $100 trillion bill, Modern Hyperinflation, 2008. I'll see you there.